don't look at your team as something you need to fix. It's something you need to support. You need to help them get better. I think a little like a child, right? You can do things for your child, but you're not really teaching them that way. You teach them when you nurture them and you get out of their way. Let them learn how to ride the bike. Don't ride it for them.
Welcome to the Team Amplifier Podcast. I'm your host, Byron Summerdahl. Here you'll be inspired by industry leaders who build flourishing tech teams. Stay tuned and prepare to be amplified.
3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, I'm here with Scott Weiner. Scott is a CTO and a tech leader and an expert in high-performing teams. So we're going to get a lot out of this episode today, especially as we're all trying to help our teams to flourish. Scott's going to help us talk through a topic that's very, very important, which is metrics, what you measure, the motivation behind that, and aligning those things with your purpose, which is absolutely going to help your team to flourish, and then all the other benefits that come with it. So Scott, tell us about you and where you're at these days and what you're into.
Sure. So for the last, 10 years or so, I've been helping organizations as what's called a fractional CTO. And that really means that for smaller companies, I'm acting as their technology leader for some period of time, helping them raise funds and so on. For larger companies, I'm usually running programs such as Agile or leadership coaching. These days, though, I'm very, very deep into AI. So that's another area that I'm focusing on, just because every client we go to has some artificial intelligence need now. But what I'm finding is a lot of the work we're doing with AI is very related to what the work I've done for years now with Agile, in that incrementalism is important in artificial intelligence as well. So we are having to do that. It's very relevant to this conversation.
Yeah. I think that incremental development is so important in many different areas. Like even game development. I was somebody the other day about game development, and it's like Agile is still not really part of their culture in game development. Incremental development is not exactly like a default part of their culture.
Right.
And so it just made me think, I wonder what other areas of tech haven't really discovered Agile, the benefits of Agile yet.
Yeah.
And where can we start to speak that into those cultures as well? So it's really, really interesting. I didn't realize that AI development wasn't quite there yet.
Well, it's not that it's not there. It's that there are companies who still have the mentality of, we want to do a big plan. We want to build something that's very long reaching, thinking out multiple years. But AI is moving so fast. You can't work that way. You have to be incremental because everything keeps changing. And so what is Agile good for? It's good for change. It's good for managing change.
Yeah.
And so that's really why those techniques that I've been working on for decades now still are practical for those types of things. For video games, it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but the nature of it is continuous learning and improvement. And for most things, that's necessary, and that's where Agile can really help. What I don't like is when you say it's all one thing, it all works one way. A lot of the work started, so about 10 years ago, what happened was I was doing a lot of very technical reviews for companies. I was doing a lot of architectural reviews, validating their technology. And what I found 9 times out of 10 is the problems were not the technology, it was the humans. It was cultural issues, it was communication issues, it was clear vision and leadership. Those were the things that were impacting their ability to get stuff done, not the actual technology itself. And I started moving my focus from how can I help you with your technology to how can I help you with your teams? And that's where I got into building high-performing organizations and learning a lot of the neuroscience behind it, the organizational theory behind it. And it's fascinating. It's a really fascinating area. And you can make 10 times improvements on teams in very short amounts of time if you follow a lot of these best practices.
Right. I hope you're already noticing, but Scott is absolutely the right person to have this discussion about measuring the right things and thinking through how we measure things and aligning those things with our purpose. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. But Scott, before we do, what's a book that you've been reading lately that has made an impact on you?
So ironically, one of the books I was thinking about is The Tyranny of Metrics by Jerry Muller. I read it a long time ago. I forgot about it. And then I had a couple of events happen where I remembered it. So I reread it recently because it really did have an impact on me. Not because I learned a ton from it, because I do this every day, but because it put into words what I was feeling. And what it does is a really good job of showing how when we measure things, we have a tendency to measure the wrong thing because we tend to measure the thing that's easy to measure. Like it's a lot easier to measure how many tasks did you finish today than it is to measure how much value did you deliver today. Yeah, it's the value that we really want to measure, not that. And the other thing I learned from it that really excited me was this concept of we measure when it is tied to high stakes tends to create in humans the need to game the system.
Yeah.
So if I say to you, you're going to get your bonus if you hit this number, you're probably going to try to hit that number, but that doesn't mean that number is the most important thing to do.
Right.
There's a misalignment that happens when we don't align those purpose with the thing you're doing. Measure.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to get into some of that in just a minute, but before we do, I just kind of want to like open the box that is Scott Weiner. And I want to like show everybody that you've been there, you've fallen flat on your face, you've been right where all of us are sometimes, and you are human. And so it's confession time, Scott. It's just you and me. Don't worry. None of this is going to get out, but I do want to hear about it. Actually, I hope a few people.
I know.
But what's an embarrassing mistake that you have made as a tech leader?
So yeah, I often refer to myself as a bag of bruises. So I've got plenty of those stories. I've learned a lot from doing. One in particular that really has stuck with me for a long time and has that kind of changed my approach to new clients is that we went into this very large organization. I was teaching their teams about story writing, how to write better stories for Scrum. Actually, this is for Scrum. And I was teaching them a lot of advanced techniques. And the product owner and we had a rapport, and I thought we had a very good rapport. I tried to establish trust very early on. We had a couple of days where we talked and we did stuff, and he seemed to really like what I had to say, and I liked him, and so on. So I said to him offhandedly, hey, would it be okay if we use some of your stories in the story class as examples? And so I brought his stories into the class, and he said, yeah, no problem. And we put the stories up, and I think he didn't understand what we were going to do, because what we were going to do is have the class talk about how we could improve the stories based on what they learned in the class. So in the class, they learned different techniques and ways of saying things that are more effective. And so they critiqued his stories and they really kind of tore them apart. Everyone was excited and happy. They came up with better ideas than I could. I mean, they really did. It was wonderful. It was a great day. A lot of celebration within the class, a lot of happy talk. The next day I got a call. The head of HR had gotten a report. He had filed a report with HR and said that I had embarrassed him in the class.
Oh my goodness.
Now, I'm not part of the corporate infrastructure. I come in and try to help. And all I care about is sharing and helping. I never for a minute was trying to, put him in a bad spot. I never thought of it that way. But what it taught me was two things. One is obviously you got to be more careful. You don't know someone, you got to really understand them. But what it really taught me was the danger of having too much sense of ownership in a team. Because the fact that he felt that strongly about it meant that the team could never critique him in a productive way that would make the team better. It was about him, not the team. And so I needed to work with him first. If I had known this, if I had thought through this and really helped him understand how to be a better part of a team and how to be more open. And I can help him with that. But instead I stepped right on him and I was so just sad that I did that to him. And that was never the intent. And ever since then, every time I go into a team and I have to do almost the same kind of story writing strategy, I spend a lot of time going over the stories with them first, sort of like you might prep for a podcast, and really making sure where there's alignment before I bring that in. I want them like happy to do it. And if they're not happy to do it, I'll use my own stories. I have no problem having people beat up on me. They can do that all day long.
Yeah. It's amazing how little things like that, and that was kind of a mistake, Scott. I mean, maybe it was more of a mistake on the PO's side, like going to HR instead of just straight to you. But no, I don't find a lot of fault in what you did. But it definitely, whether there was fault or mistake or not, it still surely influenced how you lead in the future, and you've got a stronger approach, or you've got a more, just a different way to deal with things like that.
Well, for me was, I think up to that point, I made too many assumptions around individuals and how individuals behave. And I really wasn't thinking of the other person enough. And so I spend a lot more energy on thinking of the other person. And let me tell you why, though. What I have found is that the fundamental root of any high performing team is trust. And so I'm not saying, I need them to like me. I need them to trust me. And those are not the same things. There's some very high performing teams where the people don't like each other. It's not, high performance has nothing to do. It's nice when they like each other. That wasn't my goal. I wasn't trying to be the guy he loved. I wanted to be the guy he felt like he could be open with. That's my goal.
I have some similar thoughts about human flourishing. Like some people might, when they're first starting to grapple with the concept of human flourishing, they might think that that's kind of the same thing as happiness.
Right.
And it's not.
Right.
You can be flourishing as a person. Your team can be flourishing, but it doesn't mean that everybody is happy. Now, of course, you hope that happiness is kind of a byproduct, but sometimes you have to put happiness on the shelf for a little while to allow some pain to come forward and to allow the flourishing to happen. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, growth happens through struggle. It doesn't happen through contentment. So a little struggle isn't a bad thing. Too much can be. So absolutely, that's true.
So what does aligning what you measure with your purpose have to do with human flourishing?
So speaking of books, so there's another great book, if people haven't read it, by Daniel Pink, called Drive.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It kind of answers the question you're asking in a larger way. But basically what happens is when we're asked to measure things and we're measuring the wrong things, we tend to get the wrong outcome. For instance, if I say, I'm going to measure you by how many lines of code you write, is that really a good way to measure you as a person? Even if
it's not even a good way to measure code or quality.
Well, exactly. Even if I say I'm going to measure you by the quality of the code, if you write the wrong code, does it matter that you had good quality? At the end of the day, measuring the value of what you delivered is typically what you want to measure. Now, that's not always true, but that's typically the right thing to measure is value. So how do you measure value? It's harder. And that's why we tend not to measure it. We think about our school systems. We measure grades. Is that really the right thing to measure? Should we be measuring grades or should we be measuring people's passion for learning? Should we be measuring their ability to take on complex concepts or critically think? Harder to measure. Yeah. Right. So we don't. And so we measure grades. And the result is a very difficult school system. You could say the same thing in almost any area, healthcare, crime, every single area. If we measure the wrong thing, we end up with poor results. So when we're talking about software development, one of the things that happens is there's a lot of research on this. Google did a great project years ago. It's actually, I think, in the Drive book called Project Aristotle, and it's on their website still, but it talks about their research into what makes high performing teams. And one of the things that all these studies seem to all come to is if you want a team that really is effective, number one thing is they have trust. Trust means that everyone on the team has about an equal voice on a regular basis, that they tend to engage with each other and are able to critique each other and they're able to listen to each other. It doesn't mean they all like each other. That's not necessarily what trust means. I've said that a few times. It's great when they do, much better when they do. But beyond trust, the thing that makes a high performing team is one that has purpose. It's great that I trust you, but if I don't know what we're trying to do, does it matter? I have to have direction, and that direction has to give me vision. But what I also need, and we mentioned this a little earlier on, I can't remember exactly the context now, but the idea of responsibility and feeling responsible for the work I do comes from you giving me autonomy. So another big part of this is autonomy, because if you tell me how to do my work, then you own it. If it goes bad, it's your fault. There's an old video you can still find on YouTube from Stephen Covey, who it was at 7 Habits of Highly Effective Managers or something. I forget the book now, but he talks, it's called Green and Clean. And it's about him teaching his son to take care of the yard. And he does this wonderful thing where he basically says, it's your responsibility. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Here's what I would do. And by the way, if you want my help, I will help you. And he goes through this process where his son kind of drops the ball and eventually asks him for his help, and then they get it done. But the point of it was that eventually he took ownership of it, and it took him feeling like he was really in charge of figuring it out. So when I put these things together, if I trust my team and they have a sense of where to go. And I'm not telling them I'm not micromanaging and telling them exactly how to get the work done. That's where a lot of the enthusiasm for the work comes from. A lot of sense of purpose, focus, and then a sense of trust so that I can hand the ball to you. I don't feel like I have to take it. I can trust you with it. That's how it aligns.
That autonomy will provide the individual contributors and anybody on the team with a way to like derive some ownership, some feeling of ownership. They'll start to feel like they owe something to the project, maybe. I don't know if that's probably not the right way to say that, but they will probably drop less balls. They will probably not let quite as many things go, or they'll probably not throw things half-baked over the wall to QA, or whatever the case may be. They will have more ownership over what they do if they're feeling this sense of purpose. So what's
is so powerful. Here's a quick story that might help. I was at a fairly large company. I had a guy come into my office. He was a young guy. He was a machine learning engineer, I believe. And he said to me, "I'm quitting." And I'm not his boss. I was just a consultant at the company. I was coaching his team at that moment. And he came into my little office. It was basically a closet. And he sat down with me and he said, "Look, I don't know what else to tell, but I just want you to know that I decided I'm going to leave." And I said, "Why?" He goes, "All I do is I move data from one database to another all day long. That's all I do." And I said to him, now he's a machine learning expert. So he's actually writing very complex algorithms that move data around in the company. And so what he does is a lot more than move data from one database to another. But generally that's how he was feeling. And so I said to him, "Let me tell you what you do for me as a small business owner." And I described how it was a financial institution. I described how the algorithms he was building made it possible for me as an individual company to get a larger loan from his organization because their AI that they were using understood me as an individual better. And the result of that is I was able to hire people and give them better jobs and their families had better lives. This is the story I'm telling him bit by bit. It's a little bit bigger than this, but this is the general idea. And as I'm telling him this story, you can see him in his chair, sitting up taller, breathing easier. A smile starts coming across his face. And by the time I'm done saying, "You impact so many people's lives, you change their lives because of what you're doing," I drew a connection between what he's doing and the bigger picture. He was beaming by the end of it. And he said to me, "Why don't they talk to me like this all the time?" What I can tell you is he didn't leave. Creating a sense of purpose in people and direction takes care of so many issues on teams. I don't know why they didn't do that more often, but I know they didn't.
So what we're saying, though, is that of course, purpose is what we should be transmitting or getting people, inspiring people to have purpose. But as an organization and as the leadership of the team, we can influence, diminish, or multiply their purpose by the metrics, the very metrics, the things that we are measuring. We can turn the ship in a different direction without having to have a specific conversation about purpose. We can drive and inspire purpose just by the things that we measure. Why don't more leaders do that?
So measurements tend to be conveniences, and they are masking the real issue, which I get into with teams all the time. I'll say to a team, "What are you measuring?" And they'll tell me. And I'll say, "Do you think that measurement's important?" And they'll say, "No." And I'll say, "Then why are you doing it?" And the answer is, "My management told me to," somewhere in the chain. Maybe not their direct manager, but their management told them to measure this thing. Maybe it's number of tasks or number of lines of code or whatever it is that they're measuring that they don't think is important. I'll have this conversation with them. And the result of that conversation is basically saying to them something to the effect of, "Your manager is measuring you because they don't trust something, the process, the team, something is not trusted. Because if they completely trusted you 100%, they wouldn't need the measurement." So we tend to put measurements in place rather than aspirations. Rather than saying, "I want to build the best company ever and here's how we're going to do it," the conversation we have becomes more tactical. It becomes much more something I can count, something I can know, not something I can feel. And we tend to be forced down that pipe. Now, are there things that we need to measure to run our company? Sure. But that doesn't give us, as leaders, take us off the hook of helping the individuals at the bottom of that chain understand what they're doing and why that number is purposeful. We never have that conversation. We just say, you got to hit the number. I'll give you one good example of this. I was at a town hall meeting in a very large organization. The CTO comes in, it was broadcast all over the world because they were worldwide. The CTO comes in and says something to the effect of, if we work just a little harder, we can increase our sales XYZ over the next, 6 months or whatever. And when he got off that call, I said to him, you know what you just did? He said, what? And I said, you just demoralized 3,000 people. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, you've got people who are coming to work who sometimes commute 3 or 4 hours to get here every day for a good paying job, but for a job. And you just told them if they work even harder, they can make you a little bit more money. In one way, is that creating a sense of purpose? But it is a measurement, right? And so that measurement is not aligned with purpose, and it is not motivating. And so if you want to motivate someone, give them a sense of how that metric connects to them in the real world. Connect the dots. That's what they need to do.
I think that also tech leaders don't often want to, or don't spend the time. Tech leaders don't invest the time into aligning their measurements with purpose and going through these thought processes to really improve the things that they measure in order to drive the right kinds of behaviors, the right kind of, and flourishing eventually. They don't go down this road because they've probably got a million other things they have to worry about. And it's just easier to let human flourishing kind of just fall off the map, or maybe just set it on pause kind of indefinitely. And so it's like, is it the easiest thing, I guess, to drop?
That's the bottom line, is that, I don't want to paint all leaders as lazy. I think they're busy. And I think that they make a lot of assumptions about what's important when it comes to people, and they become removed from the people because they don't. But my father, he used to run a very large organization, and I would ask him, he had thousands of people reporting to him and so on. And I asked him once, what's the secret to it? He goes, well, I've got 5 guys around me that I trust, and then they have 5 guys around them that they trust, and so on, that type of thing. And so I realized, even in that early conversation, I was just a teenager at the time, there's this telephone problem. I have to have perfect communication with the people around me, and then trust that they have perfect communication, and so on and so on. And I promise you that doesn't work. I've been a camp counselor. I know when you play telephone with a group of people, you can't even get around a circle of people and have the message clear. So how is it going to work in a large organization? So I don't blame the leaders. It's just, that's the reality, that they're talking at a certain level, and that level is not trickling down to the work I do every day, or people do every day.
So what do you think? So tech leaders, let's just say tech leaders are ready to do this. They're ready to dive in. They want to align their measurements with their purpose. But when they do it, they're probably going to drop some balls. They're probably going to fall flat on their face a few times. What do you think tech leaders often overlook when they're trying to align what they measure with their purpose?
There's a need for shared understanding. And I break it down this way. Whenever I get into a conversation with someone and we don't agree on something, I'm looking at 5 aspects of the conversation. We're working on 5 different levels. On one level, there is, what information do I have that you may not have? So sharing of information, that's number one. Do you have the right level of information to make decisions with? The next level is, what assumptions are you making? Like I may make an assumption this is easy, or you may make the assumption that it's going to be complicated. And so those assumptions need to be shared so that we can work through it. The third level, though, is we have personal experiences. We have different experiences that we're working with. And at the level of experiences, if I don't have a sense of where you're coming from, that's a problem. The next level is basically the goals, and making sure we're clear on the goals. And also, finally, the one that really, I think, answers your question is bias. We all have personal biases. And the problem is that those can get in the way. And what we tend to do is focus on the information communication, like, here's what we want to accomplish and the goals. We get all that right. But we lose out when it gets to the bias. We don't actually get through that. My story about how I made a mistake with that product owner, that was because of my personal bias. My bias was towards openness. My bias was towards sharing information and learning. That was not his bias. His bias was, I own this and I want to be protective of it. And That's what he was biased towards. And I didn't appreciate that. So that's why I view it as I messed up.
I think that also tech leaders often overlook the balance that you have to have when you're measuring things. Like there was a time when I was really trying to get my dev team to think about what I considered at that time code quality. And for me, in those days, TDD, test-driven development, was something that was going to drive out quality. And whether or not that was true or not, I started measuring the wrong things. And so I wasn't taking into consideration the balance that needed to happen. And so kind of like what you were saying before, I created a situation where my dev team, knowing that we weren't watching the exact code that was going out, we were just watching the metrics, they gamed the system. They started creating unit tests that artificially increased coverage.
Right.
Yeah. And they were able to tick off the box. There I did what the boss wanted me to do. But we didn't balance that metric. I mean, we could have actually just gone through a very different direction for our metrics, but we were trying to get this quality idea out of our development team. We could have balanced code coverage with other metrics to see what kind of coverage we're getting, but also have something else that maybe prevents the gaming of the system.
And now you're drilling into a much more core issue that comes up all the time, which is that underlying everything you just said is, what are the 3 to 5 drivers of success for us? Do we know what they really are? What are the 3 to 5 things that really drive what success means? And can we connect to all of them? And it's not 20, and it's not usually one. There's usually like 3 to 5 things. And quality could be one. Another might be a team cohesion could be one, right? Not everything's going to be easy to measure, by the way. That's the other thing, that we kind of gravitate towards the easy to measure. Measuring quality by number of tests doesn't mean quality.
Right.
You just said it. So it's not just, are we measuring the right area, but is the measurement itself really aligned with what we're looking for? Does it really give us, or are we going to get an unintended consequence? And a lot of times measurements lead to unintended consequences that can be negative as well. So from a leadership perspective, when I say I want to measure my team, I've got to be careful that I'm not trying to have them measure something without it being clearly in their best interest too. Do they agree with this measurement? If they don't agree with the measurement, yes, as a leader, I could say, tough, I'm the leader. But that's not true leadership. That's management. That's not true leadership. Leadership is bringing everyone up, raising everybody's ownership of that metric and feeling like it's important. And by the way, if it's important, then they will try to game it if we're not careful. So this is all about communication and trust at the end of the day. That's why I keep coming back to that for a reason. If we have, do you know I forget the author, but the 5 dysfunctions of a team? So the 5 dysfunctions.
I want to say it's Dan Pink, but for some reason
it's not. It's I can't remember. We can look it up.
I'm going to look it up after, and we're going to put it in the show notes.
So when I look at organizations and teams specifically, one of the things we look at is
Lencioni. It's Lencioni.
That's right. Yeah. And so the 5 dysfunctions, basically the way this works is, trust is kind of the bottom of the pyramid. If we don't have trust, we've got nothing. We've already talked about that. But what happens is when we don't have trust, people start to shut down. So let's say we're having I'll use Scrum as an example, it's just easier. We're doing Scrum planning and we're looking at the stories we're going to do for the sprint, and people don't trust each other. So they don't start to raise their hand and say, I don't agree with this, and they start not engaging and talking about their concerns because they're afraid of getting shut down or yelled at or whatever. And they don't really commit to the work. And so now we don't really have real commitment to the work. And then when something goes bad, they don't feel accountable. I didn't really believe it anyway. So they don't really feel accountable. And when they don't feel accountable, what happens? Well, they start not really caring about the results. You can watch there's a whole series of things that happen, but that's kind of the kind of parts of it. And we see that a lot. Like if I go into a team and, something goes bad, they just kind of move on to the next thing. That tells me that they're near the top of that pyramid, because they basically got to the point where you're like, didn't work. We'll go on to the next one. Management doesn't understand. There's nothing we can do about it. The one thing I do when I go in an organization and I see that they say, this is just the way it is. It's always been that way. We can't do anything. We have no power. That's the first thing I work on every time. And by the way, I will tell you a little secret. It's almost never true, even when they think it is. And they will insist it is, and they'll tell me all the ways it is, and I'll listen to them. But in the end, it's almost never true.
Yeah, kind of like when somebody brings a problem to you and the first thing that they say is actually not the thing they were worried about.
Exactly.
It's something later on.
Exactly.
So if there's one thing tech leaders can do starting tomorrow, to improve their team flourishing, what would it be?
That's great. So it all comes down to trust. And so what I would do is I would listen to your team and find the thing they say they can't change. And then immediately help them work through a strategy to change it. Don't change it for them. Help them work through a strategy to change it. And I'll give you kind of a formula for this. If you accept that, for instance, metrics are a way for the leader to see what's going on, because frankly, there's some trust missing somewhere, some communication of trust. I will ask the team, why don't they trust you? They don't like that, but they listen. And then what happens is from there, they will say, because of X, Y, Z. And I'll say, how can you fix that? Mm-hmm. And they say, well, we could get more visibility into what we're doing. Okay, how would you do that? And we walk down a path with them. And eventually they solve their own problem every single time. I've done this hundreds of times. And so I don't buy, there's nothing we can do about it. This is just the way it is. It is not true. And it doesn't really take leaders doing it all by themselves. It's not the leader coming in and fixing it. So as a leader, don't look at your team as something you need to fix. It's something you need to support. You need to help them get better. Think of it. I don't like saying this, but I think of it a little like a child, right? You can do things for your child, but you're not really teaching them that way. You teach them when you nurture them and you get out of their way. Let them learn how to ride the bike. Don't ride it for them.
Yeah, well said, and great analogy. I like that. So Scott, how can people connect with you?
Oh, and by the way, I'm happy to talk to people about these subjects anytime, just to chat. I love to. LinkedIn's probably the best way. You can also email me at, you can put it up there. I'll give it to you, but that's big fun.
Awesome. Great. Scott, thank you so much for this conversation. As often I can say with my guests that on this podcast, this one feels like the one everybody should listen to. It's going to change the world. I can just imagine if tech leaders all over the place are listening to this podcast, hearing what we're talking about, and are feeling inspired to align their metrics and what they measure with their purpose. It's just going to make the world a better place, hands down. Scott, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Team Amplifier podcast. Thanks for joining us. Now, get out there and be a team amplifier.